Hi, my name is Stefanie, and I'm doing my QU South Africa project on the education system in South Africa. I wanted to talk about the pros and cons that South Africa has as a nation and how it helps it develop education systems. I'm going to bring a worldwide view of this topic and bring it back down to local community and how we could all relate. Resources play a major role when creating anything. You need to have a well-teaching staff and materials to bring everything so it develops correctly, and students need to be able to go to these schools and use technology to become successful. A quote I would like to sum up my topic would be that children are the future. If you think about children growing up nowadays, they become the future of the society. They're the ones who become your presidents, they're the ones who vote and become professionals. And I believe that prior to this class, we watched an episode on Parts Unknown by Anthony Bourdain. And he interviewed a person who talked about his children who are very young. He referred to them as born frees. He talked that they were the ones who already know what's right from wrong, and he thought they were the ones who bring education into the society when they grow up. You need to be able to continue the speaking not only from early education, but to bring it on to further yourself, such as institutions and colleges. As enrolled in the MAT program here at Quinnipiac, I would like to express my firm belief in education. Starting from a human rights perspective, I believe that everyone has a right to a basic education. For many of you, you go to a very prestigious school as Quinnipiac. And I would just like to ask how many of you actually were asked if they wanted to go to college in general? Like a show of hands, how many of you were asked to give in the right to go to college? Or not to go? Were you asked? Were you asked if you would like to continue to go to college or not to? I know after I graduated, my parents were like, oh, so where do you want to go? And I just went. It wasn't a forced choice, but it was kind of just accepted upon us in society. Here, in South Africa, a lot of kids don't get that chance of that option. A lot of them already don't even go to school and they just start to work. They try to go out into the world uneducated into unemployment rates when a lot of people are already striving to get jobs when they're educated themselves. So how could they even compete if they don't have a basic education? So it's kind of a lost situation. As a citizen of the United States, I believe we believe in human rights immensely, and I believe that no one can take them away from us. In history class, we're preached that we have these amendments, and if you are violated by these amendments, you could go to court and you could bring a fight against this. When in South Africa, a lot of their rights aren't preached as much. For South Africa amendments, the state constitution states that the state has an obligation through reasonable measures to make education available and accessible. But do they really? Money is a major impact in any society around the world. As you can see, this young girl, a lot of people don't get the chance to go to school with the rest of the children. And a lot of them are forced to go into workforce very young, and instead of getting basic education, like a lot of us have, they don't get that option. A professor by the name of Shirin Motala at the University of Johannesburg said that it's not just about getting children a basic level of education, but it's about keeping them in there. So we could do a lot by providing them with infrastructure of schools, libraries, textbooks, materials, but there's so much you could do to keep them actually there. As a New York State citizen and graduated, we were taking Regents exam after every grade. And what's very similar with South Africa is that they have a year of maturation after their 12th year graduating. They take a matric exam, which many of them fail to even reach this point in their career. As you can see, there's a many lack of resources to keeping them there, whether it's 92% of schools don't even have libraries, so it's very hard to encourage kids to stay in school when they don't even have a place to go to challenge themselves. Another quote that she said is, it's due to poor teaching staff during the apartheid era. So a lot of these teachers were brought up during the apartheid era having a firm belief of racial discrimination, and they brought that upon students, and then they bring it upon next generations and next generations. As in the born frees already know that racial discrimination and segregation is wrong, so they need to be able to educate themselves and challenge that in school systems nowadays to bring that upon generations in the future. For comparing it to the United States, 3.3 million students are expected to graduate from the United States in high school, whereas about 8.6% in South Africa only have a basic level of education, and 41.7% has a complete level or higher. So like I said, it's not just about keeping them there or getting them there, but also being able to expand their horizon and go farther, like institution colleges. As global hands connect, we look from an apartheid stand area when a lot of people didn't want to help South Africa. They didn't want to lend a hand. They didn't want to get involved. They wanted to stay neutral. Whereas Canada nowadays is reaching to South Africa and pledging. They pledge to help improve South Africa's school system today. Having said this, a lot has changed, as you can see, when nations come together. It's a lot different than what it had been. Also, comparing it to the Connecticut, I read an article talking about modifying the school year calendar. This also talked about, since schools become more diverse, they need to make accommodations for all religious obligations and accommodations. Therefore, that would be taking off religious holidays for students, making school days longer if possible, but everyone needs to also come into agreement with this. I know from working in school systems in New York, it's very hard to get what you want out to them with little time. And I feel like for South Africa, they need to take this into consideration since they haven't, to know what they need to do to modify this and to make their education system stronger. With saying that, and being an MIT program here at Quinnipiac, I firmly believe in education, and I believe that children are the future, and you can only become advanced as our society. Thank you.
So let's open it to questions. So, does anyone have a question to start? I have a question, but questions from the peanut gallery.
You guys can ask me questions.
So you mentioned that you were talking about the population, and it seems as though you were talking about impoverished areas that don't have the access to education.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times you think of us versus them.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find any research or information that talk about the percentage of the population that does have access to education?
I didn't get the percentage of having access, but I just had like 41.7% of the population actually was able to go beyond basic level of education. So they went to college. So that's what I kind of found, but it's still like a really low number compared to like 3.3 million graduating.
Other questions? What was the most surprising thing that you found out by doing this?
I just think, well, honestly, like thinking about South Africa before this class, I thought it was like a lot about impoverishment, and I was like, oh wow, they probably don't have even that many schools, and like, but like coming to it now, like the pros and cons really do weigh out, and I feel like they're growing as a nation, and like having helping hands from like Canada, like they're pledging to be an alliance to help infrastructure and like come in and have their like resources with teachers was kind of like surprising to me. But I also found the negative side, like they were saying they only employed about 12 to 14 new teachers a year in some of the schools, when it's like 98,000 get new jobs a year here in the United States.
Do you think it's important for people where do you think the most change is going to come to education? From people within the nation or outside of the help?
I think it's going to be from outside help, just because when you have someone else coming in and you see a different view of them, it's a lot easier than just like seeing it from your own nation. Like you can make a lot of change yourself, but when you have other people coming in and you seeing a different way that they do it, or lending a hand and like getting different teaching styles from them, I feel like that's like the best way to go to do it.